Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this week's episode, Mark Rylance discusses his new film Inland, in which he plays the world-weary mechanic Dunleavy. He discusses British identity and his unlikely friendship with King Charles.
So I thought it was a misprint when I read that Fridtjof was 22 years old. It was shockingly young and precocious talent, obviously. How did you come upon him?
He dropped a script through my front door of my house.
Oh my God, so miracles like that do work.
Yeah, I not often. There's a lot of scripts that come through. I'm just too busy to consider, or within a few pages, I see they haven't really been developed enough. But in this case, it was the summer of the first year of the pandemic, so it was 8 months into the pandemic. So there was no work. I was not busy, and the script I thought was really wonderful and fascinating. I was surprised as well that he was only 22.
I mean, but you were a captive audience at the time.
Well, yeah, I did. I thought it was a really worthwhile script, and though there was no money, I didn't need money. I was lucky enough at that point not to need money, and I thought, well, that sounds like it'd be fun to go down to the countryside where he lives around Gloucester and make this film with these young people.
Amazing. It's like a real sort of movie industry fairy tale. The character you play isn't a mile off from Rooster, which is obviously you're known and celebrated for. Was that something that resonated, or was that was a benefit or not?
Yes, it was in my mind. I mean, it wasn't a charity. I did the film because I believed in it and believed in what Fridtjof was trying to do. But in the back of my mind, I also felt that the character that I played, Johnny Rooster Byron, in the play Jerusalem by Jez Butterworth, had been drawn from going down and interviewing and meeting people in the Wiltshire, Gloucestershire area. And I thought, well, maybe this is this has come to me as a way of me giving something back to that community, particularly to the young people in that community, the West Country of England. So that was another reason I thought I would do it. I suppose I'm often thinking of harmony or balance, or, you know, that you get a lot of gifts and it's important to give back. When you give back, then more gifts come your way if you want to be selfish about it. But it's more about a dance, really.
No, absolutely. The character, typically in a lot of your work, or kind of a lot of your power and kind of unique sensibility comes in the way you reinterpret masculinity in a way that maybe hasn't been done for many generations. I just wondered how these versions of masculinity, whether it's in Dunkirk, or whether it's in Wolf Hall, or whether it's in Jerusalem, as we mentioned, they all kind of tap into a kind of masculinity in some form of crisis, or being kind of stressed in a way, right?
Yeah, maybe I'm drawn to parts like that. It certainly, when you speak about it that way, I do think the masculine archetype, or whether you're a man or a woman, the masculine side of our culture, of European culture, is very much attached to this concept that we are separate from nature, that we are the gardeners in a beneficent way, and the rulers and dominators in a more obviously incorrect way. But both are incorrect. We're neither the gardeners or the dominators. We're a part of nature. We're inseparable from nature, and so I think that creates a lot of stress for the masculine. And there's a lot of people still chasing it with technology, artificial intelligence, and all kinds of things, which could be used in a more partnering way. But I'm fearful that it's going to be used to try and keep this whole collapsing way of thinking about the world, keeping it alive, and that's going to cause enormous stress and harm. I don't think it's part of indigenous tribal people's way of thinking of the world, and I think there are many people even in England now, who don't think that way. I don't think King Charles thinks that way, from what he's written and from what he's said. Yeah, I don't think I'd be drawn to a part that had a masculine aspect that wasn't in some kind of crisis of change, because I think huge change is underway, and so therefore the script would not ring true to me. I wouldn't know how to play something that I can't believe is true. I just wouldn't know how to play it. This young boy in Inland and my relationship as a mentor, father, uncle with him, and his search for a more intimate connection with his mother, who in a deep sense is lost in the forest. It had a lot of, yeah, it just had a lot of meaning for me. It was something that I did a lot of work on in the 90s. I guess earlier than that too, when I was interested in tribal people. But then in the 90s, Robert Bly and Richard Olivier had a thing called the Wild Dance movement, and sometimes 90 or 100 men would meet for 4 or 5 days, and there might be an indigenous teacher who would come and work with us. And it was in a deep way about reconnecting the masculine and the feminine in a large initiatory sense.
Yeah, that connection with the wild in the person's nature is something that you very delicately and powerfully portray frequently. So it obviously comes from a reservoir of personal knowledge and experience. I want to talk a little bit about the character of the mother, as you just explained. The mother is also very problematic because she's disappeared or somehow violated or accused all at the same time. So she's both guilty and she's sort of venerated, violated, and sort of lost. All of those things are current at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Is this something to do with the way young men relate to their mothers that you find maybe people younger than us, than you and I, that is somehow novel or problematic that causes this particular form of relating to motherhood, to mothers?
Yeah, yeah, yes, certainly the film, that's the premise of the film. This wonderful, very unusual mother. We never meet her, but we hear her. My character was very much in love with her, wasn't he? And describes driving into the middle of a wilderness to find her naked by a river, standing like a kind of Demeter goddess, an ancient goddess or a pagan goddess by the river in a kind of extraordinary harmony. If I'm thinking, I think she's dressed with twigs and jewels and things, and she's got a kind of wild, earthy, divine quality to her. So in the script, and the way he goes into the forest calling for her, or remembers walking in the forest as a boy with her, she has an archetypal meaning to me. So she's not only his physical mortal mother, but she has resonances of the great mother, of the mystery of where we come from in our physical form, certainly, that we're all born from a mother. And so the difficulties we may have with our own mother are perhaps to do with difficulties we have with the greater sense of where we come from and where we belong, I suppose. Where
Motherland.
the motherland,
Motherland.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that can be a soulful place and a spiritual place, as well as the embrace and the initial nurturing of the mother, or the nurturing of the mother throughout your adult life, as long as you have a mother. But of course, from a certain psychological point of view, a Jungian point of view, we all have an internal mother and an internal father. And though we are given a lot of impressions of that mother and father by our actual mother and father, we develop and grow a deeper sense of our mother from watching films, from reading books, from meeting other people's mothers, from falling in love with nature and falling in love with men or women. The film's a marvelous introduction to a complex level of our relationship with our mother. And of course, the boy also emerges at the beginning of the film, doesn't he, from a mental health institution. He's
Trauma.
had a kind of trauma and a breakdown, which he seems to be trying to heal and resolve by making a reconnection with his mother through the course of the film. It's a very interesting script. I thought it was very fascinating on that front, and the Time's Up Me Too movement is all a symptom of this disconnect between the masculine and the feminine, between men, at least in our culture.
Yeah.
with the feminine. That's all it seemed like it just was a very resonant film for our times.
No, no, but absolutely. I noticed that very subtle action of taking the rings on and off after a night out with the lads. That was also a kind of like a kind of disavowal of a relationship and a kind of partnership that men break and then sort of want to kind of get back into at leisure. This idea of the mother representing the natural and the natural being so embedded in particularly English culture, I think it's like a very uniquely English situation. You know, the green and pleasant land, and the whole idea of the Albion being this kind of virgin, forested, green, natural environment. And in the film, we see this sort of incision of the housing state in the greenery. So development is seen as a kind of threat and as a kind of violation of the natural, and that the characters seem to be lost in this dynamics. They don't quite belong to neither nature or to the the new housing state. Right? He's always on the road.
Yes, that's right. I mean, of course, men are part of nature as well. The masculine is part of nature as well, and that it's a little harder to find in modern culture. Again, because a different type of masculinity is celebrated. You listen to the BBC News every morning. You have different men coming on proposing different dominating ideas. That pills and technology are going to solve this relationship, this broken relationship. But certainly the way we house ourselves, the way we build residences in the countryside and in cities, it's also dominated by the idea of economics and money, and sometimes with the utility to commuting or human activity placed over the thoughtfulness about the environment. In a most obvious way, the building on floodplains, but in other ways also even the straightening of streets. You'll find often with old villages, the road comes through a village like a snake, like a serpent, and so it doesn't just come. If it comes straight through a town, it will take the energy in and take it out. Nothing will stay, but rivers and curling road that comes through a town. I'm just thinking of this as an example. It makes a big difference to the energy of a village or a town compared to, say, a city like New York, which is an amazing city to visit, but pretty brutal in terms of that grid just placed and carved onto what was an incredible island, the island of Manhattan. So yes, the housing estates and the way that these places affect young people, particularly the vulnerable young people who are a little bit more porous perhaps and a little less defended, teenagers and stuff. That was very much the topic of Jerusalem as well as this film, and resonated for me when I got involved with this film. What was wonderful too is that they had no money. The budget was £15,000, so I wasn't paid anything, and my costs of going down there I covered myself. So I rented a lovely caravan, a kind of it was like a van with a bed in it that I would sleep in, and parked it on this derelict land next to this old house we were filming in. And every evening after filming, we'd build a big bonfire, and all of the kids, all of the crew, I don't think any of them was older than 28 to 29. Fridtjof was the youngest, which was quite impressive. Right. They all saw the light shining in him enough to let him lead. Some way he had got the leadership of the group. But one of the things that was exciting is we'd sit up around the fire till 3 or 4 in the morning talking about all these international films, all the films of all the great auteurs. And it wasn't like they'd just seen 1 or 2, they'd seen them all. And they had definite opinions about where these people had reached the height of their expression and where they'd fallen off. Right. All of them did. I mean, when I was their age, I had to wait until the late night cinemas would show 1 or 2 of these films. Maybe I could eventually get them on video. That's a wonderful aspect of the internet and the good sites on the internet, that you can now see all of the films of De Sica. You can see all the films of Kurosawa, obviously, You don't have to wait for the cinemas to show them. And I was really, really impressed that there was a community there. It wasn't just this young auteur or budding auteur director, but he had a community, as you would imagine, Bergman and these, as you not imagine, Bergman and
Yeah,
these other filmmakers.
had that
They
sense of community. Yeah,
Yeah, and it was nice to see because Fridtjof is quite kind of inspired in the way he moves and thinks and does things, and they were supportive of that. They weren't challenging him that he was changing plans or coming up with things in the moment. They were excited and following him, and they were very skilled. I was really
yeah,
really excited to meet young filmmakers like that.
absolutely. It's a sort of an education when we meet younger people and we find that they come with a kind of set of for me it's, I mean, I'm a 60-year-old, work mostly with 20-year-olds, and every day is a sort of an education, right?
Yeah, we're the
Yeah,
same. I mean, it's
absolutely.
nice when you meet young people some young people are very inspired and free by not paying any attention to anything that's gone before. But I was always raised, with an appreciation of the classics in the
Yeah,
theatre
yeah,
and what the Greeks and Shakespeare and Chekhov and Ibsen had done, as well as a great love of the modern writers and what
yeah,
they were doing
yeah,
and how it connected. And likewise in film, I would go to two films every weekend. I was brought up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the Midwest, and every weekend we go to two films. Invariably, one of them would be at the old Oriental Cinema, which was showing vintage films, as well as the incredible Scorsese and all the incredible films that were coming out in the 70s in America.
Actually, it would be really interesting if you can just say a little bit, because you, as somebody who grew up in and out of England, uh, maybe you can say, I know you've said it before in elsewhere I've read, but I'd love to hear you talk about how being in and out of England gave your perspective on England. That was distinct or interesting.
Well, being in and out of anywhere gives you a gives you a perspective, isn't it? It's a particularly lovely thing to do, to come in and out of things like we do when we come in and out of our dreams and our waking hours, and when we go on holidays, and when we go in and out of anywhere. Coming in and out of England in the 60s and 70s, because my father would get a job teaching over here in the summer to enable us all to be brought back, and I would go down to a little village in Kent and stay with my grandparents while my mother and father worked, and got to know the village boys who are still some of my best friends. So the meeting of the two cultures was it was very liberating. America seemed a much more constricted culture, interestingly, but we were in the suburbs of Milwaukee in quite a Protestant, and conservative part of the city. So the free people were quite repressed people, but the working class boys that I became friends with in Sissinghurst were so liberated and imaginative and fun. And I mean, maybe it was also partly it was summertime, but England developed quite a romantic, rosy spectacled hue for me
Yeah,
as a
every
young
time you
person.
came, it was the sun was out, so there was a bit of
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know if the sun was always out, but that was all right. And then gradually, as I got older, I was taken to the theatre a lot, and that was amazing for me to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show on the King's Road when it had first opened, and see all kinds of. There used to be such a variety of wonderful things happening in the theatre at that time, with a lot more subsidy, a lot more attention to, I don't know, theatrical sensation and variety of stories and things, a lot more classics and stuff
yeah.
going on. That was the difference, yeah. And so when I would go back and forth between the two cultures, you develop an observant. You were able to step back and see as well as take part.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering, because we've got a permanently slightly an outsider in both places, and having that kind of privileged position.
And I was never really. I mean, my parents, flew the English flag on the 4th of July and held a tea party. My mum did, and they both kept their English accent. So we were very much known as the British family there. But then, of course, when I came back to go to RADA at 18, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, I had a Midwest accent, and I was immediately the American. And people who loved American culture wanted to be friends with me and talk about Robert Mitchum and Spencer Tracy and
Right.
Montgomery Clift and Jimmy Dean. And Elvis and Bob Dylan and Frank Sinatra and all this American culture, which I'd really been focusing always on English culture.
Right.
So I was really awakened to a lot of the beauty of American culture, particularly American film, when I arrived in London.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, the two things. First of all, I think it's a really interesting week. You know, at the end of this week is um, the coronation of, you mentioned Prince Charles, a kind of quite an interesting personality apart from the institution. But it is a moment where kind of like a lot of Englishness comes out of a way of like the way we perform Englishness for ourselves as well as for other people. And you know, it's quite interesting. This last week, the Prime Minister of Albania made a comment. I don't know if you saw that in response to something Suella Braverman had said. He said, "Oh, the English are having a nervous breakdown." I don't know if you saw that, but I just wondered how this idea of like performative aspect of being English, which is done for display when you're abroad, for example, with tea, with, you know, emphasizing our accent, or to ourselves when we have like social rituals such as, you know, the Queen dying or the coronation. In these moments, do they kind of how do you think this idea of being English, it's like trying to resolve itself beyond this current nervous breakdown?
I think if you're not having a nervous breakdown on this planet at the moment, you're mad, probably.
Right.
You're not very well. Um, the issues are very, very strong,
Yeah, very
um,
profound. Yes, that's true.
very profound, you know. The glove of society, of governance and culture just doesn't fit the hand anymore. And I think that's true in many, many nations. Anyway, that's their business. I don't know about that. But here, certainly, I meet a lot of people who are not having a nervous breakdown, but are making some fundamental changes. You know, people who realize they don't want to work so much, that the whole thing of becoming the best or working all the time, making more money, they don't need it. The pandemic awakened them to the fact that what they need is intimacy with their beloved, with their partners, their children, their family. And behind that, of course, is the appalling lack of intimacy with animals, with plants, but with the place. And the nervous breakdown has to do with where do we belong, and the system we're sold. It doesn't make sense, and it keeps being promoted harder and harder, and it's just going to collapse. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So that said, I meet a lot of people who are not so well known or not in the public who are underneath that and who are listening to different news that the internet makes available and different truths and the important questions, that there's an enormous amount of love and compassion and service in this country. And I'm very pleased that that's something that the King celebrated last Christmas in his. I haven't seen a lot of what's in the news, but I did listen to his message at Christmas time, and I've met him a number of times, so I know it's not just a kind of spin. That he is a devoutly spiritual man and has a very keen sense of service and of fate and what's his role. And I love the way at Christmas he celebrated so many of the unions who've been struggling lately for proper recognition and proper remuneration for their service, of whether it's a nurse or the police, who are going through a lot of changes and hopefully healing and getting better. At that level, there's a lot of hope, I think, but it does appear like a nervous breakdown. But when you get a cold and you say, "Oh, I'm sick," actually, you've been sick before you get the cold. The cold
This
is
is the healing, yes.
yeah. We should really be saying, "I'm getting better."
Yeah.
I didn't know I was sick, but I'm getting better, so I need to rest for a while until I get better.
Yeah, no, 100%. I find it is also very interesting. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Jeremy Corbyn, and he was talking to me about his like consciousness raising and like discovering politics through walking in the countryside as a young person, and I thought that was just an incredibly English thing to say, because uniquely in England, the kind of tradition of radicalism is connected with that idea of land, whereas elsewhere it's disconnected with other sort of historical sources. And bizarrely, there's a kind of version of conservative England, which is also deeply concerned about conserving conservative with a small c, and the kind of tradition of radicalism. I don't know if you saw that Jeremy Deller show called English Magic. I don't know if you ever saw that show. It was a few years ago.
I didn't see that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting that tradition of radicalism in this country is to do with, you know, even the arts and crafts, like William Morris. In this show, he talks about William Morris and how, like, confronting modernity, even in sort of mid-19th century, the kind of English radicalism was kind of a way of like preserving elements like crafts, like, you know, styles of living and production in countryside. And those are things that are kind of swept away by unbridled market forces nowadays, and that kind of bring about, so for example, deprivation in this lush and green countryside, which has like incredible hidden poverty, which you said you were trying to reconnect. Did you reconnect with that when you were in Gloucestershire filming? Did you see evidence of contemporary life and what it meant for young people?
I was only there a few days, so I wouldn't be able to say. I will say how much I love Jeremy Corbyn, and it doesn't surprise me that he is inspired by nature. I've met him on a number of occasions, he and John MacDonald even more. In my whole career of 40 years in the theatre, they're the two who've come to the theatre, to the Shakespeare plays, more than any other politicians. They're the most sensitive and cultured people, and when I meet with them after the play, they don't sit and talk with me. They sit and talk with the stage managers or with the people playing spear carriers. Or they're completely, they absolutely walk the talk of equality and egalitarianism, and the attacks on them, I think, were completely unfounded and very, very, very misguided to brand them with the kind of attacks that were leveled against them. It was a very, very sad day. It kind of ended my interest in politics, that attack on them, I must say. Yeah. But it's interesting because I bet they won't be, I don't know how much they would, what I often think when I'm praising King Charles, that Jeremy and John must be thinking, who is this? What's happened to Mark? Yeah, I think King Charles has always been a radical, and amongst the world leaders, he must be up there in the top numbers in terms of consciousness of Extinction Rebellion's issues and the challenge we face to fall in love again with the planet that we live on.
No, I see nothing but consistency in that. I don't see any weirdness. I'm sorry, maybe I'm as weird as you are, but you know, what the reason I had him in, actually, we were just, you know, apart from the politics, I really wanted to talk about the 2019 manifesto, which I think to me it's a kind of I think it's just like it's a gift to the world. Actually, it's full of such absolutely fantastic ideas. The idea of in particular the education, the National Education Service.
Yeah,
it was like, you know, the great British idea since Open University, which was another, you know, British educational innovation that has, you know, in the world and has changed so many places, so many lives in all over the world, in my country, in you know, across the world. It's these ideas, maybe the politicians are negated by the processes that have happened, but I very much think and hope that the ideas will last and will be deployed and taken up elsewhere.
I'm sure they will. I mean, you know, if you or I were elected to lead the nation or lead a party, we would obviously look back to a document like that as we were drafting our own ideas and hopefully be inspired. But the forces ranged against the fear out there, the fear and the loss of the people who have benefited from the monopolies and the whole market force towards monotheism and everyone eating the same hamburger, everyone driving the same car. You know, that's how you make a lot of money. The fear of losing that and returning to something much more unique, and the sense of the true meaning of anarchy, which is not chaos, but which is people having more governance in small areas over their lives. Obviously, it's not just a theory of selfishness. It's a theory that we find our own governors inside ourselves and make our own agreements in a small way rather than these big economic dukedoms and
Yeah.
feudal systems. That the forces ranged against people who are trying to change that are very strong. But I think it is happening, and it is inevitable that we will come together and we will be more connected with the planet, because the planet is guiding us that way. Unfortunately, it's going to happen through some tragic events, the way we're going. But and maybe there will be some very bad behavior before we get there. But I do feel hopeful that it's inevitable we will get to a better relationship.
The glove doesn't fit, as you very brilliantly put. It's quite
Yeah,
clear, and I think they keep changing the hand, and
trying to.
and it's the same glove and the same hand, and it doesn't work. Let's just talk very very quickly about the ending of the film, which was kind of quite enigmatic, and I just sort of lost me a little bit. It was like he was having both a breakdown again, taking his clothes off and going back to the embrace of the forest. Is it kind of just a message broadly, like a kind of back to nature, or is he going there to be buried or to be like reborn, or both? How did you read that personally?
I think it's very good to have an ending that lets the audience doesn't pin down one meaning, but opens the audience, as you've been just saying wonderfully, to an imaginative afterlife once the screen goes dark, and you're imagining what is happening, what's he doing, why has he done that, where's he going. For me, there's two aspects to that scene. There's the car, and there's him standing with a very long perspective from a hill and seeing lights of or is it's dawn maybe coming up, I can't remember.
Yeah, dawn coming up.
This kind of this place of height and long view and light, and that thing that in the classic sense of masculinity, we're meant to rise to the top, have
The
this
quest,
brilliant
the
kind of
Arthurian
general,
quest, yeah.
general perspective of the town, of civilization, and then get a flash of light in the rising sun and all that, and that he turns away from that. That's a very important part of that last scene, that he's turning away from that and going into the darkness, into the wood, where the perspective is not large concepts and ideas and planning, and but you're in the damp of the wood, you're in the darkness of the wood, you're in something that's full of the cycles of change and the old beings of the trees, but mostly you're going into this very fertile opposite to the light and the ascent. It's going down into a valley and going nakedly too into it, without identity, or the protection that clothes give you, but going into that and trying to understand that. Now, I'm a positive type person, so I don't imagine him going in there to die. Interestingly, you remind me of a story that happened to a friend of mine. I won't say the names, but a relative of his had been diagnosed with cancer, and she was in a treatment center having chemotherapy and other brutal, I mean, sometimes they save people, but they're very brutal techniques as a last resource to combat cancer. And she went missing. And my friend had 30 people searched all the woodland and all the countryside around this hospital. And they eventually found her after 3 weeks, lying on her back in a woodland. And she died lying on her back, looking up at the sky and the trees. And many of the people, obviously, they were very sad she died, but she was going to die. I was sorry too for them that they'd lost, but I thought also there's the possibility she made a kind of wonderful choice, that rather than dying with a lot of pain-killing stuff in her and in a kind of cold technological thing, she thought, no, I'm going to go out, I'm going to lie down, look at the trees and the stars, and let myself go into the greater mystery in that way. We'll all come to that point at the end. So if the boy is thinking that, I don't think it's necessarily tragedy. No, not necessarily. But I don't think I think he's going into the wood to heal himself and find himself, and in the many different ways that a wood can do that.
Yeah, no, and all the parallels, with his the Green Knight reference and his green car, and the all the Arthurian legends are just very kind of profound, very kind of clear in the
Yeah, it's
background.
a lovely film, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of a dreamy film. I do really like also his thing of boom.
Yes,
He'll hold a frame
yeah, the
for quite
camera
a
is very
while.
still. Yeah,
Yeah, so Kurosawa does that, and some other directors do that very beautifully.
Kiarostami. Yeah.
Yeah, Ciro Guerra does that too in his beautiful films, and it's I find it very musical, and I like the sense of a photograph which
Mm.
has movement in it, and so the film's quite dreamy, poetic, and expressive. I do hope that he'll be enabled to make more films.
Yeah, well, you've provided the most incredible platform for him, and I mean, if he doesn't have a magnificent career after this, nothing else will work. So the film is brilliant. You're amazing to made it possible. One final question, but you've done plays at which you have spent weeks and weeks and months inhibiting the same role, and then you do a film like this, which you say took a matter of days, and yet you have such a kind of incredible recollection of the character. How do they compare, and how do they affect you differently?
I was going to say you can't go as deep as an actor in a film, but you know because you don't get the longevity of life with it. With something like playing Hamlet, which I played 420 times at age 16, at age 28, and at age 40, that that means there's a great depth of connection 8 times a week going in and doing that. A bit like doing exercises or meditation or eating a certain medicine regularly compared to just taking one dose. Um, on the other hand, the liberation in film of the spontaneous moment, that's all you need. You just need to capture some things once, and then they've got it. That's very interesting and challenging too, like shooting an arrow at a target. It's enjoyable. There isn't so much of a sense of a community on film. This did have a sense of community, and actually, Fridtjof, actually, the way we filmed it was very nice because we would film it, and then he'd say, "Right, can you play him bringing up more of his compassion for the boy? Oh, wonderful. Now can we play it again? Can you be more judgmental of the boy?" And so he gave us different colors and different. He didn't say hit this or hit that. He would give you a point, what I call a point of concentration, which is a very nice way of playing because he's liberating you to play it as you wish, but he's just guiding you into different fields, so to speak, or into different cars if you were making a journey, and now make the journey on a bicycle or on a. So he was very imaginative in the way he filmed with us, closer to someone like Malick, to Terence Malick, who also is very imaginative in the way he instructs, is not interested in continuity at all, um, and not and always trying to surprise the actors so that the inspiration can come in because the plans the plans have collapsed. There are no plans. He won't let you plan. Um, so maybe I remember the film partly because of that, because it wasn't a machine. It was something more organic and creative always, and inspirational.
Yeah, no, I certainly felt. I only saw this last night on a computer screen, which is not very the best way, but I felt your character shimmered throughout, as I find it quite hard to position the relationship as one of trust, love, distrust, even slight hostility sometimes. And I thought that was one of the most tantalizing aspect of it. Thank you so much for your time. It's been such an absolute pleasure and honor to see you again and to have.
Yeah, lovely to talk with you too. Please do reach out again if you want to talk about other things I'm doing in the future.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.